Today I'm going to show you how I used powder blender and colored pencils to draw these pumpkins. Now, if you are completely new to using powder blender with your colored pencils, I do recommend check out the video that I did walking you through step by step everything from when to spray, how much powder blender to use. Everything is covered in that video. It's definitely a really good first project, and it explains a lot more about powder blender than I will be doing in this video. I will have a link to that video in the video description. If you are supporters over on Patreon, make sure to head over where I've got the over 2-hour version of this tutorial available for you there now. If you are unfamiliar with Patreon, for as little as $4 a month, you get access to all of my weekly 1 to 2, sometimes 3-hour long tutorials. I have over 200 of them that you get instant access to as soon as you sign up. That is a lot of tutorials for $4. I will have links to that in the video description. For this one, I am working on Fisher400 Sanded Paper. This came mounted. I get them from proartpanels.com. I used a regular graphite pencil and sketched out my pumpkins. Now, one of the things you may notice if you've watched my videos for very long, normally I'm constantly saying make sure you keep your colored pencils very sharp so that you can get that pigment into the tooth of the paper. When you are working on sanded paper, you don't need to. Your pencils can be pretty dull. You can see I'm holding it to the side there. It goes down so fast. This is a method of blending your pencils and of course the fact that I'm working on sanded paper, it speeds up the process of colored pencil a lot. And I know a lot of people don't really like colored pencil because it is such a slow medium. This may be a solution for you. This really does speed things up. And you can see just in one layer, look how much pigment is on there. So what I'm going to do once I get the basic shapes and colors blocked in, I'm blending that out with a soft tool and a little bit of powder blender. A little bit of that powder goes a very long way. Once I get that blended out, and you don't see this in the video, but I'm using a product called Texture Fixative. Touch-Up Texture is different. We'll be talking about that later. But Texture Fixative, also from the same company who makes powder blender. It all comes from Brush and Pencil. I will have links to all of the supplies I'm using in the video description. But I spray it with the Texture Fixative, and this does two things. One, it kind of seals, and I don't mean seals like a varnish, but it does make the pencil stick more to the sanded paper. So when I go on top with additional layers, I'm not continuously knocking that product back off. The other thing it does is it will add tooth to the paper, which is always a good thing when working in colored pencil. Now, to be fair, working on sanded paper, it's going to have a lot of tooth anyway, but any little bit really helps so that you can do more layers. When you work in colored pencil, everything is a layering process. This is not a paint by number where you're just going to put the right color in the right place. Watch how many layers, how many times I go back through this to get the color saturation where I want, and to, in this case, clean things up. Look how muddy things are right now. Totally fine. I will add more layers until I get everything how I want it. So I blended that again with powder blender, then sprayed with my Texture Fixative. Now, when you spray the Texture Fixative, there are a couple things you want to keep in mind. One, let it dry completely. If it's not completely dry, it can kind of chip or flake off some of the previous layers. So, or whatever it was that you just sprayed over it. So you definitely want to let that dry. You can use a hairdryer. Now, previously I've said they recommended not using a hairdryer to dry it faster, but we've tested it. The manufacturer tested it, and I've tested it myself, and I didn't have any negative results at all using a hairdryer to speed the process along. And one of the things that I really liked about using the hairdryer, and I didn't put it on super high heat or anything, but it also helped blow some of the excess pencil off the paper. So it just made it a little easier for me. It kept things just kind of running smoother, I guess, and I got to move along faster for the next layer. But you do want to make sure when you use that Texture Fixative, let it dry completely. The other thing is that the Texture Fixative, just the nature of that product, has a tendency to spit a bit. You get these bigger, heavy droplets. A couple things you can do to avoid that. One, make sure that can is shaken up really well. When they say to shake it for like 2 minutes, they mean it. That full 2 minutes, you really want to shake that well. The other thing is that you can take the nozzle off of it and soak it in hot water for a bit. You want to do that every so often because that nozzle will start to clog. Now, when it does spit, which you saw earlier, it went pretty quick. You may not have noticed, but it spits all over mine as I'm working because I was too lazy to clean my nozzle. It's not a big deal. I've done this enough times that I know it's not a huge deal. When I put my additional layers, it will work out those little droplets. I am just going to be much more careful on those final layers not to spray too heavily, and then that's going to be my next tip. Don't spray that thing super heavy. This isn't hairspray. This will have huge droplets come out. You don't need a lot of it. Just really, really lightly. Keep that can at least a foot away from the paper as you're spraying. And it's not a super strong scent like a varnish would be. A varnish I would never spray indoors. But with this, it's it's kind of like spraying hairspray. That's very similar. I wouldn't spray it in a room if you've got birds. Don't spray it in the room with the birds. Same as hairspray. You wouldn't want to spray anything like that in the room with one of those critters. But for me, it's not causing any problems, any headaches, and I'm prone to headaches. I can spray it and sit in the room with it, no problem at all. Now, those white bits that you saw me doing just a second ago, what I'm using is also a product from Brush and Pencil. It sounds like a whole advertisement for them, but I'm not sponsored, but this one is being done with the titanium white. Now, normally when I work in colored pencil, you see me paint white on. That's by mixing touch-up texture and titanium white together to make a sort of paint. Here, I'm just using the powder straight onto my colored pencil to get those really nice, bright white highlights that I'm blending in to get, well, this look in the background. Now I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next pumpkin. I'm going to go through on this first day. This was all done in one night, which says something. That's a lot of colored pencil to get done in a single night. Like I was saying earlier, it is a very fast way to work with your colored pencils. But my goal here was to get just a base layer on everything. I'm going to come back through and add more details on the pumpkins the following night. But here, I just want to get my general colors blocked in. This is always the part of paintings and drawings I don't like. I don't really enjoy the first layers. I like to come back the next day when I can do all of the detail work. That's what I think is fun. So that was kind of my goal this night. Just get the part I don't enjoy as much out of the way first so the next night I can have all the fun. Turn that on its side so that I can rest my hand on the easel a little bit easier and get straight lines. Now, the only time that I'm really going to push hard with the pencil is when I'm trying to get a really, really, really crisp line where I don't want it to blend out very well. Now, another tip with working with Powder Blender is Polychromos are your friend. They work better than any other pencil I've tried with Powder Blender. Now, I have used the Derwent Lightfast. Those work pretty well too. And the Derwent Pro Color did blend with them. But your wax-based pencils like Prismacolor or the Caran d'Ache Luminance, my brain shut down for a minute there, but the Caran d'Ache Luminance, any of your wax-based pencils, they just don't play real well with Powder Blender. They don't blend out well. They stick to the canvas or the paper too much. So I like to use the oil-based pencils for my base layers. Anything I know I'm going to blend with Powder Blender, I'm going to stick with my oil-based pencils. So in this case, that is going to be my Polychromos. Now I can use my wax-based pencils for my final layers that I know I don't need more of the Powder Blender with. So it's not that you won't ever use your wax-based pencils when working with this. It's just that you don't want to use it for areas that you plan to blend out with Powder Blender. It's like the wax creates, it just sticks too much to the paper. It doesn't want to blend. I've tried a few different methods with it and I just was never really happy. Not like I was when using the Polychromos. That definitely gave me my favorite results. Now, if my white isn't quite white enough here, that is okay. I can go over it either with my touch-up texture titanium white that I'll paint on, or I can use a wax-based pencil because that's going to be really opaque on sanded paper. But if I'm going to do that, like I mentioned, that needs to wait until the very end when I'm done blending with Powder Blender. For smaller areas, you'll start seeing me work with or blending out with my fingers. I've got the small blending tool here for my initial layer with the Powder Blender, but when I add layers on top of this where I just need to smudge things a little bit, I find that my fingers blend things easier than some of the bigger blending tools. I tried blending Powder Blender with paintbrushes, was not happy at all with the results of that. It's kind of like taking a broom over dust. The dust is going to go away. And that's really what happened here when I used paintbrushes. It just knocked most of the color right off that paper. So I don't recommend paintbrushes for the most part on here. The only time you'll see me use a paintbrush is when I'm using my odorless mineral spirits to clean up edges. Now, a huge tip, if you are going to use odorless mineral spirits on a project that you've used Powder Blender and you're on sanded paper, you want to do it in a very specific order. So you've added your colored pencil, you blend it out with Powder Blender, you want to spray with your texture fixative. Once that dries, then you go on top with more colored pencil and you decide you want to clean up an edge. That's usually what I do it for really sharp edges. If I want to go over it with odorless mineral spirits, I can at that point. What you don't want to do is put your colored pencil down, blend out with powder blender, put more pencil down, skipping the step with the touch-up texture fixative. I always get that backwards. And then go straight on top of that with the OMS. You'll create this horrible paste. Make sure that anywhere you have used powder blender has been sprayed with your texture fixative before future layers where you've added the colored pencil and then you want to blend with OMS. You have to have that texture fixative down in between anywhere where powder blender has been applied. So, and I know it seems kind of confusing because all of these products they're made by the same company, the touch-up texture fixative, the titanium white I'm using, and the powder blender. But you want to make sure you do that in the right order. So again, with OMS, it would be, you've got your colored pencil down, you've blended with powder blender, use your texture fixative, let it dry. Now you've added more colored pencil, you decided you wanted to use OMS, that's safe. Just make sure that texture fixative is a layer in between anywhere where powder blender has been added. And even with me, where I thought that I had it really good, where I've definitely sprayed everything with the texture fixative, there have been times where I didn't have an even enough layer. So when I went on top, I still had I made a bit of paste and it didn't look good, and I had to let it dry and then go back over it. You can fix it when that happens, but it's not cute. Be careful with that. I don't use odorless mineral spirits too often when I'm working on sanded paper, and with powder blender, I generally don't need it. There's just every once in a while I want to get a slightly more crisp edge, and then I'll usually choose to go ahead and risk it, I guess. Adding some pink now to that background. Now these pumpkins, I really like the reference photo. I found it on Pixabay, and it's perfect because, as many of you know, we are having a house built, so I'm completely broke now. This Christmas I can't buy anything for anybody. So I'm having to do, which isn't a bad thing, I'm having to do artwork for everybody as gifts. So this one is for my mother-in-law, who loves pumpkins, but she also loves pinks. Oranges really aren't, just your typical orange or fall colors don't work in her house. So this one, having almost those Easter pastel type colors, is going to be perfect. So that's why I chose to draw this one. This is actually my mother-in-law's Christmas gift. No one tell her. You can see my fingers a lot as I go through here, blending out. You don't need to constantly blend everything with powder blender. You will get to a stage where you've used it enough on previous layers that just lightly going over that with your fingers will work. I'm going to take my blue, this is a light ultramarine blue, I believe, and go around the edges. I really like how that makes the pumpkins stand out from each other, and just anytime you've got blue up against orange, being that they are complementary, it looks so nice. It gives you that bit of a glow, so may not be in my reference photo, but I love the way it looks. And remember, just keep layering until it looks how you want it to. There shouldn't be a limit. As long as you're not pushing too hard on your previous layers, you can layer on top of layer on top of layer. Don't call it done just because you have color on everything. Keep working on it. Put it away, come back the next day or a couple days later with fresh eyes and see if there's something that you may want to change. One of the biggest mistakes that new artists working in colored pencil, whether it's with powder blender or OMS or however you want to blend, one of the biggest mistakes I see, or challenges that newer artists make, is they'll show you their work and they're like, I know it's not right, I just, it's finished, but what could I do to improve it? I'm like, well, finish it. You're about a quarter of the way through. So when you're going through everything, just having color down does not mean that you're finished. Keep that in mind. Keep layering until you have the results you were looking for. And if something comes out and you're like, wow, that's terrible, a bad layer doesn't mean you've ruined anything. You're not done yet. Just keep layering. Now on that paintbrush, that is where I've mixed touch-up texture and titanium white together, and I can paint this really bold white on there. Now, I do not recommend using acrylics or gel pens or anything like that. Those are not going to be archival on top of your wax and oil-based pencils. This combination, and I have a video showing you exactly how I mix it and how to use it. I'll have a card pop up and then a link in the video description so you can check that out. But this is actually archival. It's intended for colored pencils. It's made for this. So it is the only product that I do recommend for painting on or getting those really, really bright highlights. I love it for painting whiskers on animals too. Any type, like little hairs, little fur, if you like to paint animals or even people. I've done that a lot. Even if I'm not working in Powder Blender, that combination of the touch-up texture titanium white mixture, those are absolute must-haves for me in my colored pencil supply list. It just makes such a difference and makes everything way easier to get certain fine details that can be a real challenge with colored pencils otherwise. There is where I'm using the odorless mineral spirits, and you can see where it makes things really crisp, a lot darker, but I did make a little bit of mud and lift some of those areas up and have to go back over them. But that is it for this project. Again, if you are new to Powder Blender and you want something that's a bit more complete on explaining every little thing, and it's a much longer video, check out that butterfly and flower piece. It's a really good one that'll walk you through step by step exactly what to do and when do you spray the texture fixative, what do you do if it goes wrong. All of that is covered in that video. But this one is definitely going to be fun for the fall holiday. Fall holiday? No, fall season. I don't know words. I don't know why you guys listen to me. In today's episode of This Has Absolutely Nothing to Do with Art. I don't know why you're showing us your fish today, Lisa. I'm showing you my fish eating their fish crack. They're called tentacle teasers. It is some kind of an egg. It's by Rod's Fish Foods. Oh my gosh, they go absolutely crazy for it. I just thought it was cute. So if I think it's cute, you must want to see it too, right? Right? Anybody? I get this food from Aqua Studios Aquariums. They are located in the Colony here in North Texas. So if you do have fish, strongly recommend checking them out. But they've got a huge, huge selection of frozen foods. That's actually how I found this store in the first place. So yeah, that is what they're eating now are these tentacle teasers, and they go absolutely crazy for them. It's really funny to watch them when they'll go up and just start trying to suck the eggs out of the little pipette. Like they're not even willing to wait for me to squeeze them out. They're like, nope, we want it now. I don't know. I'm weird. I thought it was adorable. It's the only food that I have to be careful with because they won't let me know when they're full. They would eat until they pop. I've never hit a point where they were just like, okay, we're done. We're good for the day. No, they will just keep eating nonstop if I let them. So I have to kind of watch that. They're seriously I'm telling you, it's fish crack. Have you subscribed yet? If not, I have a handy button right there. It's round, has an orange arrow going towards it. If you click on that, that'll help you to keep up to date with all of my new art videos every single week. You may also want to click on the bell icon because YouTube is really bad about letting people know when people they're subscribed to have new content. So, bell icon is also handy.